Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the 8th album from Orbital. Wonky. Okay then, this review has a lot of build-up. First of all, it was Orbital's long-awaited comeback album following an 8-year hiatus/breakup, in which both brothers released a solo project, both of which I reviewed, and I suggest you check out my reviews of those two, if you haven't already. Second of all, for those of you who have read the About section of my channel, you'd know that this album was where the Wonky and the Wonky Angle comes from. And other people will know that this Orbital t-shirt that I wear on a regular basis depicts the artwork of the New France single from this album. I remember completely freaking out when this album was announced. Well, really I was freaking out more when they released their single Don't Stop Me / The Gun Is Good. I knew Orbital had broken up and hadn't even considered the possibility of them coming back together. And not only did they release new music, but it was a single I really freaking loved. Well, at least I really love Don't Stop Me. Like, the video killed radio star samples and epic build-ups all over the track are almost completely unmatched in their whole catalog. The Gun Is Good, it's alright. More structurally interesting, but less memorable. But yeah, an 8th Orbital album especially sealed the deal that these guys were really back and here to stay, even though they broke up again later. I will be discussing that later in this review. Anyway, now of course, I think this album's great. Big surprise there. But what might be a slightly bigger surprise is that I think this is probably my least favorite Orbital album to date. At least it is right now. I mean, it's not by a long shot or anything. Maybe just a tiny bit below the Green Album. But I do have my problems with it. I'll go down track by track. And to start with, this album is interesting because, in my opinion, it gets better with each progressive track. Each track is a little better than the one before it. Of course, that means my least favorite is our opener here, One Big Moment, which is probably the weakest opener to an Orbital album we've gotten to date. Mind you, it's still a perfectly good song, definitely lives up to its title. It's got this slow build-up with all these various vocal samples and goes on to have this super triumphant feel to it. That being said, the melodies are not quite as on point as they usually are. Some parts sound kinda weak and it's just not super memorable. It's still quite enjoyable and I know how it goes. And I loved it on first listen, however, I get the feeling most of that was just purely thanks to my excitement that the album existed in the first place. Again, works as an opener. But when you compare it to openers like The Girl with the Sun in Her Head, Planet of the Shapes, or Way Out, it just isn't as impactful as I'd like. It's a good song, but Orbital can usually do better than just good for me. Straight Sun is the next song, and this track is a little odd. It meanders around and has this very light, exotic flavor to it, maybe? And perhaps as you'd guess, it's quite sunny sounding, although this whole album is quite cheerful like that, and this isn't even the brightest or sunniest song on here. Like, this track's main draw is it's like this, got these piano sounds that come and go at various times. I really like those. I mean, the track sounds cool, and is even pretty catchy for how abstract it is, but it doesn't leave a lot of emotional impact, personally. And then next is Never. This was released as a teaser before the album, which I didn't check out at the time, because I didn't want to spoil myself as per usual, but whatever. For a long time, this was my least favorite track, but weirdly enough, it's grown on me in like just the past couple of days. I didn't like it much previously because it was probably the track on here that stood out the least and wasn't super interesting, but what this song does have on its side is just the fact that it's a very satisfying listen. Right around the halfway mark, the song changes from a more chill track to a more up-tempo, sunny anthem, and the bass drop right around there, if you want to call it that, just sounds great, as does the whole rest of the track following said drop. Then there's New France, which is the point at which I no longer have any complaints regarding the album itself. It's an official single, and once again, it just sounds great. It's got a cool, satisfying chord progression, and the vocals of Zola Jesus, who is just as incomprehensible as Alison Goldfrapp was back in the day. Oh, and the vocals of Leanne Hall are sampled here. She worked with Paul on the track For Silence and Please. And also later did a full album with him under the name Haunted House, which was alright, but not something I've exactly returned to on a regular basis. Regardless, the track New France is great, and it only gets better from there. Distractions is the longest track on the album, at just under 7 minutes long, which is in itself a bit disappointing, but whatever. The song itself, though, is really nice. Much like Straight Sun, it's kinda odd sounding, but still pretty catchy. But I like this song a fair bit more. It starts out kinda spastic and slow, but doubles in tempo near the end. And all the pitched voice samples are almost earwormy. It is maybe a bit repetitive and doesn't have a ton going on, but it's fun enough to listen to that I don't mind at all. Maybe it feels like it was 4 minutes or something. But then there's Stringy Acid, which is a very on-the-nose title. A lot of these old-school, quirky acid house synths calling back to the stuff they did on the Green album, but also an epic synth string section backing everything up, making the song sound extra huge and grand. Cool and epic twist on some old formulas, and it just sounds freaking amazing. But guess what? It gets even better. Beelzedub is next, and this is basically a modern dubstep remix of their old track, Satan, and this may very well be my favorite modern dubstep track of all time. Not just because it happens to have Orbital's name on it, anyone could make a modern dubstep remix of Satan and it'd make perfect sense. But it's just that most modern dubstep tracks don't sound this good. Thing is, most tracks in this genre just smash a limiter down on all the sounds to make everything sound distorted, but Orbital gave all these sounds room to breathe in the mix. Sure, there's lots of intentionally distorted sounds, but there are some undistorted sounds too, and it just has a spaciousness and complexity to it, where most tracks in this genre just feel like they're smashing random noises against a wall. And yes, this is coming from the guy who actually likes that genre, but whatever. And the fact that it's a remix of Satan certainly doesn't hurt either. But the album shines the brightest on its final 2 tracks. The title track, Wonky, featuring Lady LaSure, I actually hated this one on first listen. I thought it sounded like crap, and had too many atonal sections. And what's with this rapper on here? But later I found something weirdly catchy about it. It slowly grew on me, and now it's one of my favorite Orbital tracks of all time. There's not that many Orbital tracks out there that make me want to dance this much, even taking it basically the entire Middle of Nowhere album into consideration. Like, it has the power to make my body move uncontrollably at this point. Lady LaSure's rapping is freaking unbelievable. She goes so fast, almost to the point of incomprehensibility, and yet I can easily recall almost every syllable that comes out of her mouth, even if I don't actually understand half the words she says. I know the famous how and fun up about and kill him now. I'm crazy possessed, I'm hideous cow. Everybody get down with it, and it's found. Ow! I got a different style. This beat is gonna my spinning around. Just a competition. Okay. Of course, the best part of the track is the middle, which has an actual melody, and she repeatedly says, "The speed is taking over me." This track, my God, one of the best dance songs of all time for me personally. But as you might guess, given the pattern I've been describing so far, it's only the second best track on this album. And the best is, of course, the ending, entitled Where Is It Going? This song not only makes me want to dance almost as much as the title track, but it also just has this absolutely fantastic melody. Super happy and triumphant, perhaps, to bookend the opener. I love this song so much it almost goes beyond words. This might even be in my top 5 favorite Orbital tracks ever, but I'll figure that out when I try making the ranking in its own video. So yeah, now that I've sung such heavy praises towards the latter 2/3 of this album, you might be curious why I might have further problems surrounding this album. Well, one of the problems I had has been addressed and no longer applies, but it drove me completely crazy whenever I listened to it in the last couple of years. Thing is, Wonky may be their most recent album, but it simply does not work as a swan song to Orbital's entire career, as I'd been led to believe it would be from their second breakup in 2014 to their recent reformation earlier this year. The Blue Album felt like a goodbye album. The track One Perfect Sunrise in particular was also very happy and uplifting, but it also had an underlying melancholy, like Orbital were fondly looking back on their legacy and saying, before we go, let's hit you with one more gut punch of a track. But I don't get that same feeling out of Where Is It Going, or Wonky in general. Like, some people have theorized that the title Where Is It Going was in reference to Orbital being unsure of their future, which, I believe this fact might have been confirmed by Paul, I'm not sure. And people have continued to say that this was foreshadowing for their upcoming final breakup. But this theory really pissed me off because that's not how I read that track at all. And I really highly doubt that was their mindset when they were making it. Remember, as I mentioned, this track is super happy and triumphant, not a hint of melancholy in there at all. I took this track and the Wonky album in its entirety as a comeback. Orbital saying they're back for good, and this final track saw them looking ahead to the future and seeing further great things to come. And now that they're back together in 2017 with a possible 9th album on the way, it's still entirely possible this is the case, but this interpretation made their 2014 breakup announcement especially shocking. Because I thought they were going to be back for good! I was absolutely crushed and inconsolable upon hearing the news. At least for about 2 hours or so, then I just saw Paul's announcement of 8:58 and looked forward to that instead. And my dad did remind me that these guys were still brothers and that it would be unlikely they'd really be separated forever. I also saw this one article when Orbital announced their reforming that revealed that they did have a bit of a standoff that led to them not speaking with each other for some 5 years. I have no idea what the standoff actually entailed. They've always been super tight-lipped about that kind of stuff. Now, I do have 2 brothers myself, one of which is my polar opposite in basically every way, and we get into disagreements fairly frequently, to put it lightly. And the other one, which I did the review with, I mean, I could see myself hanging out with him for these extended periods of time, just, you know, I don't know about 20 years. Point is, I can understand the whole sibling rivalry thing, but something undoubtedly bothered me even before the second breakup. See, when I bought the album on iTunes, it came with a digital booklet, and the album isn't even available on iTunes anymore as of just a few weeks ago, which is really weird, and, I digress. Yeah, if you look at the CD booklet here, you note, see here, he writes down the writing credits on each track. One thing that really stuck out to me and kinda unnerved me when I saw that was the fact that Phil Hartnell is only credited as a writer on 2 tracks, being Beelzedub and Wonky. That Beelzedub was co-written by Phil already kinda goes without saying. I mean, it is a remix of Satan. And the rest only credit Paul. All the other tracks they've made together on the previous 7 Orbital albums credit P and P Hartnell, i.e., both of them. And only now was the crediting that unbalanced. I was kinda in denial about this fact and tried to brush it off. I mean, first of all, since Phil has production credits on all of these songs, and second of all, see, Paul and Phil had this, like, video diary series on their official channel, which kinda showed them in the studio and, showing how they made the album. And one part of this video diary series kinda stuck out to me. Like, it showed Paul coming up with a demo of Distractions, and he was by himself in the studio because Phil was sick that day. I figured he must have written a whole bunch of these little demos in that little time span, and that would all go on to become the other tracks. But in retrospect, it looks like that was the only one he showed that day, so I don't know. All I can say is I have no idea for sure, but if this was the topic of their above-mentioned standoff that led to their second breakup, I would not at all be surprised, quite frankly. We'll have to see when Album 9 arrives, but all that aside, I still very much do love Wonky. Obviously, since I have named the channel after it. I think it's an excellent dance album that is very much worth your time like all the others. showing Paul and Phil not only more energized than they'd sounded in years, but also showing an example of older artists trying newer styles and actually working to their advantage instead of blowing up in their face, Underworld barking style. All the qualms I have surrounding its release and the less than stellar first third of the album still stand, but I still put it on a regular basis and enjoy the hell out of it. So even if it may be my least favorite Orbital album right now, it is still an Orbital album, and as to be expected, I still love it and highly recommend it. And I'm overall feeling an 8.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time. You to know that this is the album where the Wonky in Wonky Album... Fuck. Wonky Album. Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Album.